world becomes a more digital space, we cannot forget about the human connection. That's a quote from Adam Neumann, who's an Israeli-American billionaire and investor. In 2010, he co-founded WeWork with Miguel McKelvey, where he served as CEO from 2010 till 2019. And perhaps you've seen the movie on Apple TV Club, WeWork. So how often do you find yourself sitting next to someone with similar interest or drivers as you and get talking? It happens to me regularly, and I find that because I'm open and curious and enjoy conversations, I develop relationships in the most unusual way. I'm constantly stretched to think on different levels from these conversations. And with the use of ChatGPT in the digital space, the need for human connection is coming more and more to my mind because it's so important. We need to be creating opportunities and awareness and sharpen our skills to connect on a human level. Today, my guest is AJ Tennant. Hello, AJ.
Hello, Karen. Lovely to be here.
Really nice to have first connected with you. And as I said, it's like synergy that we both happened to be in an online workshop together. And it was when I was listening to your conversation, it became clear to me that we shared similar values and a desire to create communication and connection. For those of you who haven't met AJ before, he teaches skills of communication, listening, empathy, and compassion to organisations. He's also taught ethics for over 7 years in primary schools. Outside of organisational workshops, AJ has built a 1,000+ strong community who enjoy free workshops twice a month. I've invited AJ to speak at my business community event in September, but today I was curious to learn what moved him from the corporate space, where he'd enjoyed a long career in communications, working in advertising, government and charities, and helping brands, politicians and doctors to communicate their message, to where he is today, understanding that people lack connection and how we are destroying the planet. It's also timely to speak with AJ because there is a push to end loneliness. And one of the partners of my business community, Chatty Cafe, also on that journey. So AJ, why do you think having conversations to connect is so important?
Yes, thanks, Karen. Well, we could have a hour and a half lecture just on that question. I guess we can think about it on the individual personal level and on the societal and global level. So for a bit of background, what we know is that empathy, connection, perspective taking, being able to see other people's points of view, that skill has dissipated over the last 40 or 50 years. And when they've done massive studies of it, it's something like a 40% reduction in our ability to see someone else's point of view. So one reason we need to improve the way we connect and understand each other is to solve these big global problems we have, big heated political topics, divisions between people on personal issues, policies, things like that. But then it's also this personal connection. You mentioned loneliness. Well, the major answer to loneliness, and we can discuss this, is human connections. It's quality relationships with other people. And part of that will be seeing people frequently, but far more important will be the quality, the timber, the spice of the connection you have with your partner, your friends, your workmates, your neighbours, and all the people in your circle.
Absolutely. I've had the conversation with Glenys Reid from Chatty Cafe that you can be in a crowded room, but you're still lonely because you're not connecting. So that's a very big thing to think about, is to how lonely are you, or how connected are you actually feeling? So I mentioned a little bit about your backstory, but tell us more about how you moved from what you were doing and what were the signals to you that you should change your direction?
Well, I tend to say that I used to work in advertising and marketing, but now I'm actually quite a nice guy. I had studied law and philosophy, and I spent about 15 years working in marketing. I was a copywriter, I was a speech writer, I was a communications manager, I was helping doctors talk to the media, I was selling people mortgages and cans of Coca-Cola and all sorts of things they didn't need to buy. And I mean, I had a bit of an epiphany when the bushfires happened, actually. I was really hit by what was going on. I was very disappointed in the way government, which I worked for at the time, was responding to it. And so I guess we'd say quietly quit these days. I gave enough notice. I said to everyone, I'm going to move on. And I went and got involved in activism. I was really doing a lot with the environmental movement, not earning any money for quite a while. And while I was doing that, I got into these ideas of human connection and conversation. And that over the last, say, 2 years or so, maybe 3, has led me into these workshops.
So was it the bushfires in particular that heightened this problem, or was there a particular moment, a particular aha moment that came to you?
Well, for the big career change, there was actually a bit of an annus horribilis for me, which was I'd been to the Barrier Reef and I'd seen, in terms of climate change, what was happening. The bushfires happened, and then a otherwise wonderful event of my wife falling pregnant with our first child happened. But that really suddenly hit me with, what am I doing with my life? What world are we leaving for our kids? How am I going to better serve this and then be able to look my child in the eye in 10, 20, 30 years time and say that I tried to do something meaningful towards making the world a better place? And at the time, that was purely focused on environmentalism. But it turned into this idea of better conversations and closer human connection. And 2 reasons for that is that one is I myself started to feel lonely, and I was missing quality connections with friends. And then the second was, I guess, something actually kind of inspiring, which is the environmental activists I were working with. Apart from doing, radical actions out there in the world, together they actually worked on regenerative communication. They would sit down, support each other, work on listening, empathy, caring for each other. Because if you're out there worried about the planet and your soul is being stripped away and you're potentially going to get arrested for, peaceful resistance, you're full of grief for the planet, you then need to have people hold you and support you. And that's where I got inspired to start looking into empathy.
And so what year was that?
Well, for me, it started, I think in early 2019 is when I got involved with them. Mm-hmm. And the Better Conversations workshops, I think, I know they started just a few months before we went into lockdown, because I was running it in a pub. I was loving running it in a pub. It was, let's have 2 beers and get into some really great chat. And then soon after that, it was, well, should I be having a glass of wine while I'm on Zoom running these things? Is that okay? I'm with other people in a way. So I shifted it online, as I'm sure lots of people, facilitators, people like yourself, had to do with the kind of work you're doing as well. And it opened up a bigger audience in a way. Suddenly people from around the world could come and get involved. But at the same time, it was missing a little bit of that personal connection you have by being in the same space with other people.
Sure. Well, this podcast came about during that period of time because I'd written a book about conversations and connections, and I thought, well, it's a really good idea to, try a podcast. So I've got plenty of time on my hands, and so that is how it came about. But I found that I got tired of the same sort of conversations about talking about COVID all the time, and just how could we do something different? So that's when I actually created the Conversations Count Game, which will play a bit more later, or play a little bit later, because it was a way of learning something new about people that I was connecting with, friends and family, but on a different level. And getting past the sort of grumpiness of COVID, but maybe trying to deepen a relationship and to get inside the head and have a conversation where we didn't necessarily know the answer, but we could explore some things together. So I totally hear it. But it was very quiet, wasn't it, compared to a live event where you've got a lot of chatter happening around you? So
yes. I mean, there's always benefits, and I think we learned all about how we can use Zoom and other softwares for having more interactive, more engaging workshops, or allowing people to get up and walk away for 5 minutes and come back. But yeah, that electricity of spontaneity that you have sitting across the table from someone and thinking oh, what is this person like? Is this going to be a good conversation? A terrible conversation? That was lacking.
Yeah. Well, we would never have met if it hadn't have been for the online space. So,
I
I
know.
think, I'd written a book about you can't network online. It has to always be in person. And I had to take those words back. But it certainly expanded my horizons and my network. And I've had some, amazing conversations with people. But it is different. We had a live event last week, and the buzz in the room was crazy, because we're not used to noise. When you're in a Zoom room, it's very quiet and people have to take their turn. But in reality, there's people humming and got their own conversations happening all the time. So we often talk about the need for curiosity in conversations. I do, and I'm sure you probably do too. And we're going to have more of a conversation at an event on the 6th of September about that. But how do you encourage people to be curious and to get into a deeper conversation, rather than, maybe in a business sense, people fall to what do you do? How do you encourage people to engage on a different level?
Well, probably like what you do is using games is a great way to do it. So we could talk about the philosophical, academic side of curiosity as well. But the two games that came to mind for me is one that I call, I ripped off from the game show Pointless. And I asked people to try and come up with the most obscure fact of something they know or something that's happened to them that no one else in the room could possibly have. Someone in this game I played said, I lost a limb and had it reattached. And as you might imagine, no one else in the circle had that for themselves. And we found out she cut off her toe when she was a little toddler and then had it reattached. It was all fine. But it was this sort of, how can we find out really interesting tidbits of people that we would never usually bring up? And the second game, which I love, is I ask people in a Zoom setting to think of 3 things they know a lot about or they're very passionate about. So you might say, oh, look, I love crafts. I know everything about fishing, and I've got every Batman comic there is, so I know all about Batman. And then your partner in your conversation has to pick the most boring of those topics, the one they know the least about, that they wouldn't want to talk about, and then has to ask questions to you. And my prompt to them is usually, and this is probably the big tip, is to start thinking about how questions. How did you get into this? Why is it that you love it so much? Who was it who got you involved in this? What's your earliest memory? So, don't describe to me IT software and what it can do for my computer, but tell me why you're fascinated by it. Who did you learn it from? And then if the conversation meanders into something else, that's amazing. But
Yes.
it's really about emotion instead of knowledge and facts. What's the emotional connection there?
Yeah, I like the question. I'm fascinated by why people do what they do and how did they actually get into that in the first place. So that's a great tip to encourage a different way into that conversation. So one of the cards that you might get if you played Conversations Count is, what do you hope to do that you've never done before?
Oh, sorry, I'm just loving that card. So this is the question for me. I'm on the spot now.
Yeah, you're on the spot now.
Oh, what am I hoping to do that I've never done before? Well, I would have said for years skydiving. And I remember on my very responsible bucks party that I had, my friends drove me into an airfield and opened the door and were about to walk me into the building, and I was sweating, and they hadn't told me about this, and then they jumped back in and said, no, we're just joking. And I was so full of relief. And I think something in that told me I'm actually fine never skydiving in my life. So that's one thing that I thought for a long time I really, really wanted to do. These days, I think have some more. The things I loved was being in nature. And I want to try and take what I've always loved, going camping, going hiking, and explore new ways of doing that. Go to new places. And now with 2 little boys, I think maybe what I could look forward to is doing that with them when they're a little bit older and they're a bit more rugged and, can go for longer walks, that we will do that together and explore the wonders of Australia and maybe New Zealand as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I really love that conversation, that question. One of the people on my podcast I asked, and Michelle said she wanted to live in a lighthouse so she could have a
Oh,
360-degree view of the world. I would never have thought of that. So it's actually quite interesting sometimes to just think, well, what would I say? You know,
mm.
what would be the thing? And I still haven't come up with an answer for myself, really. It's, there's so many things that are of interest.
Well, now that you've said the lighthouse one, that's another great way of sparking something in me, is that we're looking at moving house, and I keep half jokingly saying to my wife, "Are you sure we don't want to go live in a commune? I think I could live in a commune. I think that would be wonderful. Friends, people around, sharing things." So part of me, like, maybe in my older years, I'll go live in a commune.
Well, yeah, well, that would be good. So I know you run a variety of workshops, and we've talked about a few of them. And as I said, you're going to run a session with my community. Tell us a little bit. This is actually off script, but tell us a little bit about the workshops that you're doing with organisations, because I am a big advocate, as you know, for conversations and connections. And one of the reasons it was great to connect with you is that it is a human thing. And so it's not something that just women do or just men do or whatever. So I really wanted to have a conversation about, from your perspective, and the value and what you bring to the people that you work with, because I think it's a softer skill, but it's a skill that everybody needs to get better at, I believe. So
Yeah, there was I heard the other day, and I'm going to check this to see if this is factual. I don't want to be sharing misinformation, but it used to be that people in a workplace, when they wanted support, they wanted about 80% of support for processes. So teach me how to do something, help me work the software, the machinery, so I can do my job right, and give me 20% personal support, HR, listening, good management. And that's flipped now. So what people are looking for is a culture, a supportive environment, managers who care, teammates who will support them and listen. So really what I'm focused on is bringing empathy into the workplace, and particular organizations for me come to mind that I really do want to work with more than others. But the reason is that if we're going to be working together, then we should be listening to each other, supporting each other, getting past, as you put it before, the COVID conversations, or the how about the weather, or how about that footy team on the weekend conversations, and actually create human connection in the workplace. And my way in for that tends to be using empathy. And then if I get a second bite of the cherry with them, I then try and introduce them to humor as well, because for me, that's the flip side of the coin when it comes to connection.
yeah, and I'm really interested about that. So how do you do that? And, do you make people laugh, or how do you use humor in that situation? Because that was one of the, things we were talking about as to how we would run the session in September. And I was really curious about that one. So, yeah.
Well, I am a recovering amateur comedian. I spent years, I was writing for TV, I was doing stand-up, doing a lot of sketch comedy, Melbourne Comedy Festival, Sydney Comedy Festival. But the main skill I learned was not really being funny, but developing a bit of a thick skin. And so I stopped worrying if people found me funny, or if I said something that was a joke and people looked confused or didn't laugh, I tended to shake it off. So what I really want to do, if I engage a group of people around humor, is first of all keep it light, make sure that there's not a lot of pressure, but show them that in a workplace or in a group setting, a volunteer organization, that so long as you're not inappropriate, there is no reason for us to feel worried about appearing silly, awkward, foolish in front of people, and that humor is the quickest way to form a connection with someone. And that there's all lots of little tricks around it. But the first one is, don't be funny, be silly, be playful, be curious, ask more interesting questions. And another one is to try and encourage the other person to be the funny one, make them feel good by laughing along with what they're saying. So there's lots of little tricks to basically make a more playful environment, and not necessarily a environment full of comedians.
Right. We have a few interesting and entertaining members in our business community. And so that really relates. And a couple of them have been members for 10 years. And they do, when it comes to a particular point in an event or something, they're often the ones we sort of say, so what do you say? What's your take on this? And it is usually a humorous response. So I guess if you were playing, another card that you might like is, what's something that you could teach me in 60 seconds?
I mean, I'm so tempted to obviously talk about empathy, but
please do. That's fine.
I mean, I could, so I could go through the key steps of empathy, but the most important is to say to people, if you want to be empathetic, just focus on two things. Firstly, mindfulness, trying to clear your mind, being present with someone, not drifting off and having thoughts about other things. So can you work on being more mindful when you're around people? And secondly, can you get rid of judgment? So when they tell you something that you've got a bit of advice to give them, or that you think they did something wrong, or that you want to endorse what they said, instead of judging what they tell you or needing to tell your own story, as you would say, be curious, ask questions. So that is really most important about empathy. The other skills we talk about around clarifying, validating, supporting, taking action and actions of kindness or compassion is great, but really just come back to holding space for people by being mindful and non-judgmental. And that is doing 50 to 70% of the work of empathy.
And last night you were telling me you ran a workshop on mindfulness. Was empathy a large part of that?
I had to hold myself back from going into empathy too much, because I did mention to people that, hey, being mindful in conversations with other people is really the key skill, the foundational skill of empathy. But we don't need to go into empathy too much if you don't want to. Let's focus on how can you build mindfulness in yourself? How can you start being more self-aware? How can you control your body? So when those flight or fight or reactions come up, maybe you're having a heated discussion or someone says something that triggers you, how can you remain calm? How can you use those skills of body checking, of mindfulness in embodiment to allow yourself to stay very present with someone?
And the benefit in that, in connection?
Yeah, well, it's both the connection with ourselves, so how you can learn to be more aware of your own thoughts, offer yourself self-compassion and empathy when things come up for you, but then it is also the connection with someone else. I think we're all very good at noticing when someone isn't really there, when someone is distracted, when someone is nodding or smiling, but they're not really hearing what you're saying. And that's where trust is kind of broken. So if you're meeting someone for the first time, you're making a first impression, if they are eyes wide, nodding, even just making those little sounds, the and it feels genuine because they are being genuine, then you build trust. But if their eyes are flicking away, or you can tell they're trying to say their own story while you're still sharing something, then that connection isn't there.
So connection starts from a very early age, obviously, and with screens and children being constantly sort of head down and not necessarily engaged in a conversation with a group of adults, for example, or there's children at an event and they're sort of off to the side. We need to be starting to teach connection, I think. And you've done some work with primary schools, or with schools rather. What sort of work have you done with them, and what advice could you give to parents who really are conscious that their children perhaps are spending too much time on a screen, at how are they going to get them involved, and how are they going to develop this empathetic skill so that they're a better human?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is that, kids develop that theory of mind around the age of 6, 7, 8, I think. So sometimes if people are feeling like, I'm not sure my kid's that empathetic, my kid doesn't seem to care about others so much, I think that's pretty normal, because we're all very egocentric when we're young. But you mentioned screens, and Sherry Turkle has a book. I think it's called We Need to Talk. We Need to Have a Conversation, perhaps. And it is all about how the internet, and particularly social media, is creating such a huge problem for young people in terms of being able to connect with others, with family, with relationships, with friends. So it is huge. So you mentioned that we should invite kids into conversations. When we're at the dinner table, it's fine to have a little bit of adult conversation, but if kids are there, open the door to them to be part of it as well, so they're not excluded. And the mindfulness around kids who, for me, I've got a almost 4-year-old, so he asks 4,000 questions a day, and it's very tempting for me to ignore it or somehow close it down. And apart from trying to have a little bit of quiet time in the day, is encourage him to ask those questions and take part in that as if it was an adult to adult conversation about something that really mattered. Because kids are insanely curious, and we need to make sure that that curiosity is lived out in live spaces with human beings, adults or kids, and then really get into, and I'm sure teachers these days are wonderful with it, how are we going to manage social media? Because social media, it's a big problem. I think the goods that it brings are far outweighed by the negatives for really everyone.
So we've meandered a lot around in this conversation, and that's actually what I like about conversations, that you be curious and you don't necessarily know where the end result's going to be, but it's a way to expand your thinking and to challenge your ideas and to work out what parts of a conversation are really relevant to you and what maybe you need to think a bit more about. So have you got some good resources that you would share with people? You had a couple for me the other day, and I think you've got some blogs on your website. So what areas could you excite people to look into?
Well, the things that I've been enjoying and learning from. So my Bible for me that got me excited about all this at the start was The War for Kindness by Jamil Zaki, which is about the importance of empathy in the modern world. And there's lovely stories in there about different individuals and groups. And the other one is, I think his name is Rutger Bregman, who the book is called Humankind. And it's a wonderful story, a wonderful investigation into how human beings are actually fundamentally kind. We have a story that we're aggressive creatures, cavemen who descended from chimpanzees and all want to beat each other over the head and start war. But actually at the core of it, we are collaborators, we are friendly, we are kind, and it's only modern society that has got in the way of that. You probably talk a bit about tribes and tribalism, and there are problems with tribalism when you get to things like race and gender and how we exclude people, but also our instincts are to be part of a tribe, and a tribe should be a wonderful place where we help, support, learn and care for each other. And so Humankind really taps into what in a positive way is our tribal nature. So those are the two books, and also Lost Connections by Johann Hari. I'm halfway through that at the moment.
Right. I haven't heard of a couple of those, so I'll be looking them up. The last thing I'd like to just bring up is that in my community, we have male and female and all people. Do you see a difference between genders as to how people relate and connect? What's your take on that? I've got my opinion. What's your take on that?
I could write a book and I'd call it Men Suck at This, because I suck at this, and it's obviously not true of every man, but for the 60% of women who are good at this, it might be 30 or 40% of men who are good at this. Men are not so versed in connecting with their feelings, and that might be partly biological and certainly cultural and social, the way we're brought up. So I think us men need to work on it a bit more, and certainly the experts that I listen to talk about it is they're very sympathetic to men about this. It's not like men are terrible. It's that men are just not skilled in this, and we should help and support them to get there. So all the men's group activity that happens out there, those are wonderful places for where men start learning to listen, to share, to support, and to be vulnerable with this sort of stuff. So on the male-female dichotomy, yeah, men are the ones who really need to work on this more. And if men are more skilled at this, they are the ones that will make society a better place by going through that change.
I
I don't
actually
know,
find,
what do you see?
yeah, I think the same thing. But one of the reasons why the community I run is open to anyone is because I think women also can learn a lot from men, particularly in a business sense, because, you know, business comes from networks. And if women are too homogenous and stay within their own group, they're not learning how to communicate with these men who perhaps are not so great at talking, but also have skills that they can learn from. So I see, yes, I think men find it a little bit more challenging because that's the way they've been brought up. But I think there's a lot to be said for open conversations between men and women, because men have feelings too, and they have doubt, and they have imposter syndrome and whatever, and they sometimes hide it. And they don't need to. They need to be open and, you know, feel that they can be more vulnerable. And it's not a weakness; it's actually a strength. I think if you can be in touch with your feelings and, you know, be able to express how you're feeling, doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a better, perhaps more empathetic person if you can stand in someone else's shoes. But women, yes, I think, you know, they do find building relationships easier, I think. But I think there's a lot to said for both, because, as I say, we're all human.
Yeah. And like for me personally, when I learned that men tend to communicate with each other in this side-by-side manner, that men go for a walk or they go for a hike, and when they're not having to stare each other in the eye, they can be just as open and vulnerable about things as women. But there's something about sitting across the table from someone, staring at them, that women are quite comfortable with. There's an intimacy there, and a lot of men, me included, I wouldn't even notice it at the time, but that would put up some barriers for me. So how can we find places for men to feel more comfortable to bring out all this wonderful stuff that's coming up for them, that, you know, beneath the surface, those feelings are just as strong, but they're just, as you said, they're hidden.
Yes. And I think that's why golf is very popular. But I think it is. And I think even with children, you're having children who are in their 30s, but knowing sometimes doing an activity alongside your child, or, you know, not sitting across a table and sort of drilling them, but actually it's just part of an activity that you're doing. You can often have a better conversation, like in the car, you know, when you're not looking at them and putting them on the spot, you can have a good.
With the parenting, so I've got a almost 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and they're both boys. So I've become conscious of how can I help them be open, emotional, resilient, vulnerable, but strong, all these things. And for me, what's opened my eyes is people can go look at aware parenting, gentle parenting, respectful parenting. All of these very similar modes of parenting talk about when your child is upset, when they're crying, when they're throwing things and they're angry, the first thing to do is get down on their level and say, wow, it seems like you're really upset. I'm here. And you let them feel that way. And you keep some boundaries around safety and people getting bonked on the head, as little boys will do, but go, you know what? They're going to cry for the next 20 minutes and I'll hold them. I'll sit with them. I'll console them, but I'm not trying to make this stop, because emotions are valuable, valid, and should be allowed to come out. And as I was doing that with my kids, that kept reinforcing that that should be okay for me too, as a 40-year-old man, to be able to do the same thing.
Absolutely. And do you have that's a good note for us to finish on. So how can people connect with you, AJ? What's the best way?
Well, they can come along to the free workshops, which is Better Conversations in Meetup, and they're on every 2 weeks online. They can check me out at ajtennant.com.au. And if anyone is involved in a for-purpose group, a community organisation, social entrepreneurial groups and are thinking about empathy in the workplace, I run an empathy gym, which I tailor to groups. And that's basically 6 to 8 weeks of coming in and just like a workout or a boot camp, going through the exercises of empathy, boundaries, grief, and even a bit of humor in there as well.
Wonderful. And have you got a quote to finish off with?
Yeah, as much as there's beautiful quotes by, ancient Greek philosophers, I was thinking about the one that might have been from Walt Whitman. It might have been from Martin Luther King, but it's certainly said by Ted Lasso in the TV show, which is be curious, not judgmental. And those 4 words really sum up the approach and the mantra to try and have when you're stepping into a conversation with someone.
Excellent. And I think that might be the title of our podcast. Thank you very much. And I look forward to the workshop on the 6th of September. Thanks for your time.
Wonderful. Thanks, Karen.